In any case, the 62,000 Allied men who were transported by Japanese hell ships went through a horrific ordeal, and thousands of them died as a result. Those who did survive surely suffered later in life from the trauma they endured, and this video is dedicated to these survivors and all who lost their lives aboard the Japanese hell ships during World War II. In 2012, the world was surprised to learn that a cruise ship named Costa Concordia had sunk off the coast of Italy. It was the first sinking of a major cruise ship since at least the Oceanos in 1991, and it's debatable whether or not Oceanos was a major cruise ship at the time. In any case, the sinking of large passenger ships was practically unheard of in 2012, and Costa Concordia was the first sinking of a cruise ship in the sense that most people today think of cruise ships. So naturally, the tsunami of Titanic comparisons hit without delay.
Much bigger than the Titanic.
Infamous cruise ship disasters since the Titanic.
I heard one report it was 3 times as big as the Titanic.
The fact that you could have seen these comparisons coming from 50 miles away does not make them any less ridiculous. Listening to a mainstream news outlet discuss a topic you are familiar with is always revealing of the quality of news you are receiving, and makes me at least wonder what else they're getting wrong on a daily basis. Before I explain why it is ridiculous to compare Costa Concordia to Titanic, let me briefly explain what happened to Costa Concordia. Costa Concordia was on a 7-day cruise in the Mediterranean. The cruise started on January 11, 2012, from the port of Cagliari, from which it would sail to Palermo in Sicily, then Civitavecchia, north of Rome. From there, it would make way for Savona on the northern coast of Italy. But the ship would never reach its third port of call. The official course would have taken the ship between mainland Italy and the island of Giglio, which is approximately 10 miles offshore. But the captain, Francesco Schettino, deviated from this course to perform a sail-by of the island of Giglio, which would have given the passengers a unique nighttime view of the island. This is not where things went wrong. Deviations from planned courses are common, particularly for cruise ships, as they avoid bad weather systems and optimize the itinerary for passengers. Hi everyone, I just want to let you know that I'm taking a short break from making videos at the moment. But don't worry, I'll be back with a brand new video on May 1st. In the meantime, I wanted to give you something for the month of April, so I'm releasing one of my Patreon exclusive videos to my entire audience. This episode of The Great Quick Move, which you are about to see, is one of the earlier ones I released, but it is one of my favorites, so I hope you enjoy it. If you like this video and want to get access to the entire Great Quick Move series, consider joining my Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Thank you. There are a lot of obscure White Star liners, but perhaps there are none more obscure than those which were planned but never built. Many people are familiar with the planned Oceanic of 1925, but there are many more planned but unbuilt White Star liners. Let's take a look. Gigantic, 1892. Not long after the completion of RMS Majestic, rumors started brewing of a new White Star liner to be built by Harland & Wolff. Even back in the 1890s though, the press were not exactly a reliable source of technical information such as shipbuilding. One reporter for the New York Times wrote a piece which appeared in the September 17, 1892 paper that a ship to be named Gigantic was being planned for White Star. It would be 700 feet long, have a beam of 65 feet, and be powered by engines producing 4,500 horsepower, which, somehow, was supposed to propel the ship to a surface speed of 22 knots. Another article, this one in The Shipping World, describes a ship, also to be named Gigantic, which is planned to be no less than 800 feet in length. These press reports are likely describing preliminary plans for the ship which would eventually become the RMS Oceanic. Olympic, 1899. Oceanic would end up being a unique ship in a class of her own, but it was not always meant to be that way. Oceanic was tremendously popular among the traveling public, and thus commercially successful. Naturally, White Star had planned to build a sister for Oceanic, but circumstances got in the way when White Star was sold to the International Mercantile Marine Company. With the financial future of the company in question and 3 expensive ships already on order with Harland and Wolff, plans for Oceanic's sister, to have been named Olympic, were put on hold and never revisited. Gigantic, 1911. I debated whether or not to include this one. As many of you will know, the 3rd ship of White Star's famed Olympic class was rumored to have originally been named Gigantic rather than the name we all know her by today, Britannic. Technically, the ship was built. However, depending on the timeline of events, the ship supposedly slated to be called Gigantic was modified significantly and renamed Britannic during construction. For this reason, it could be argued that Gigantic was not built as originally intended, and the ship's new name did not reflect the theme of grandiosity of the Olympic class up until that point. Before we continue, I should mention that it is generally considered unlikely that the White Star Line intended the 3rd Olympic class ship to be named Gigantic. The evidence against this popular theory could be the topic of a future video, and I won't go into all of that here. However, I stand by my assertion that Britannic was not built as initially intended, and was quite a different ship from her sisters. Admittedly, this point can be debated, and it is a nuanced topic, but this is only meant to be a fun video, so if you disagree, please don't go too hard on me in the comments. Alright, let's move on. Cyric, 1913. Cyric, 1913. Details are light on this one. According to John P. Eaton and Charles A. Haas's book, Falling Star, the White Star Line was in talks with Harland and Wolff to build a replacement for the lost Titanic. It's not clear what the ship, to be named Cyric, would have looked like, but there is evidence that it would have been larger than Titanic by a considerable margin. It would of course make sense for the replacement to be at least as large, and of equal speed to Titanic, as to create a balance between the new ship and the surviving Olympic and the anticipated Britannic. Cyric was never built, and her yard number was reassigned to what would become the Belgic and eventually the Belgian Land, once sold to the Red Star Line after World War I. Belgian Land, it should be noted, was considerably smaller than any of the Olympic-class ships, at approximately 28,000 gross register tons, which suggests that either the Cyric was planned to be smaller than Titanic, or that construction had never progressed very far before the project was cancelled. Germanic, 1914. There are White Star Line records from 1913 listing a planned ship of 33,600 gross register tons to be named Germanic. But before construction could begin, World War I halted that project. And once the war was over, the planned Germanic was redesigned, altering her size to 40,000 gross register tons, in an attempt to replace the 48,000 gross register ton Britannic, which was lost during the war. At that point, the planned ship was renamed Homeric, and her keel was laid down in June 1919. But in 1921, White Star acquired North German Lloyd's ship, Columbus, which was herself renamed Homeric. Even though the newly acquired ship, a 35,000 gross register ton vessel, was considerably smaller than Britannic or the ship currently under construction, the new ship was cancelled. Partially constructed, the former Germanic was downsized to an 18,000 gross register ton design and eventually became the second Laurentic. Oceanic, 1925. Perhaps the most well-known and well-documented unbuilt White Star Line ship was the planned RMMV Oceanic. This new ship was intended to restore White Star to its former glory and allow it to compete in the league of upcoming superliners such as Queen Mary and Bremen. Oceanic was to be over 1,000 feet long and 60,000 gross register tons. And on June 18, 1928, her keel was laid down at Harland and Wolff. After the initial burst of enthusiasm and anticipation from the public and the press, Construction proceeded slowly and intermittently. Eventually, construction was stopped altogether. White Star had a convenient face-saving excuse for this, though. The company told the public that it was exploring the possibility of using diesel engines to power the ship. While it was true the Oceanic was meant to be a diesel-powered motor ship, the true cause of the delay in construction was financial, not technical. White Star's new parent company, the Royal Mail Group, was bordering on financial ruin, and there was simply not enough money to continue construction. The keel of the ship was coated in protective oil with the hope that construction would resume, but it never did. Instead, the company absorbed the financial loss of £150,000 and dismantled the keel. The materials would go on to become two smaller motor ships of approximately 26,000 and 28,000 gross register tons. These ships, Britannic and Georgic, would be the last ships bearing the White Star Line livery. The White Star Line had never tried to compete with its rival Cunard on speed.
Brickyard 4467, wind 200 at 10, runway 31 left at Kilo Echo, clear for takeoff.
When Germany's Emperor, Wilhelm II, decided in 1899 that Germany must build merchant ships to compete with the likes of its British rivals, the shipping company North German Lloyd got to work, with government support, building a new class of ships. In 1897, Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, named after the German emperor himself, was launched. She was the first four-funneled ship, and at approximately 14,000 gross register tons, was then the largest ship in the world. The next year, Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse took the transatlantic speed record, known as the Blue Ribbon, from Britain's Lucania, and so began an intense maritime rivalry.
Accommodations. This would set Britannic's design apart from her two older sisters. Third class was given new entrances.
आपल्याला कायम असं वाटायचं की आपला एक दोस्त पाहिजे, थोबडा चिकना नसला तरी चालेल, हात चिकना पाहिजे.
Between Germany and the previously unchallenged Great Britain. But Britain returned the shot with White Star Line's new ship, Oceanic, which became the largest ship in the world in 1899. Another German shipping company, and the subject of this video, the Hamburg America Line, came onto the scene with the introduction of the Deutschland in 1900, which took the speed record but came up short in terms of size. Britain and Germany continued to spar over the records for speed and size. This battle for supremacy on the Atlantic contributed to the rapid development of maritime technology around the turn of the century that I so often talk about in my videos. Germany retained the Blue Ribbon for a decade until Cunard's revolutionary Lusitania was completed in 1907 and instantly shattered the transatlantic speed record. Lusitania built upon her success, beating her own speed record 3 times before being bested by her near sister Mauretania in 1909. During this 2-year period, the record for average speed across the Atlantic increased from 23.99 knots to 26.1 knots, nearly a 10% increase, and Germany had been left in Britain's wake. Speed, though, came at the price of higher fuel consumption and pesky vibration, and Germany recognized the impracticality of competing for the Blue Ribbon with merchant ships meant to economically carry passengers across oceans. Hamburg America would set its speed ambitions aside moving forward. Instead, the company would adopt the business strategy of Britain's White Star Line and focus on size and comfort. Even though Germany's national pride and that of the emperor was tarnished by this forfeiture, they knew that they could still compete with Britain in terms of size. The White Star Line had never tried to compete with its rival Cunard on speed, and was well on its way to building the largest class of ships in the world, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. We remember Olympic and Titanic as being the largest ships in the world during their time, but in May 1912, just 1 month after Titanic sank on her maiden voyage, another ship of a different nationality was launched. This ship would be the SS Imperator, and she would dramatically surpass the Olympic class in terms of size. Once complete, Imprivatur was delivered to the Hamburg America line and would come in at 52,117 gross registered tons. In contrast with the frequent changing of hands of the record for the largest ship, Imprivatur and her two younger sisters were destined to remain the largest ships in the world for nearly a quarter century. The Imprivatur-class ships were the third.
What's up guys, my name is Jake. When I was a kid, I remember having a coffee table book and reading all about classic and iconic shipwrecks. It was the 2005 Lost Ships of Robert Ballard, and it sparked my childhood curiosity on ocean liner disasters. A vast collection of some of the most iconic shipwrecks of all time. So it's no surprise that what happened on July 25th, 1956 piqued my interest as it became one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history. One that ultimately brought down the almost brand new icon of Italian pride. This is the story of the sinking of the SS Andrea Doria. This video is very fittingly sponsored by Maritime Replicas. Stay tuned to the end of the video to see how you can get a discount from me on purchasing your very own museum-grade model ship. It was the late 1940s, and Italy was just coming off of World War II, which had shattered their economy. The country had lost more than half of their merchant vessels during the war. So, in an attempt to re-establish Italy's role in the vital shipping industry, the partially state-owned Italian line had commissioned two new passenger vessels. These ships were promised to be fitted by some of the finest artisans in Italy, all within a sleek and stylish exterior. Italian Line's newest flagship started construction in 1950 and was to be named the Andrea Doria. Her sister ship was also laid down not long after and given the name the Christopher Colombo. Almost 3 years later, Andrea Doria was ready for her maiden voyage setting out of Genoa, Italy on January 14, 1953, en route to New York City. Andrea Doria was a symbol of pride for her country, a physical and monumental showcase of Italy's engineering prowess. While she may have not been the largest or the fastest at the time, Italian Line had ensured that Andrea Doria would be outfitted as one of the most luxurious vessels afloat. Famous Italian architect Giulio Minnelli was hired to ensure that, and once the vessel began service, passengers noticed. From the cabins to the grand spaces, the vessel became known for its ultra-contemporary design with lavish artwork throughout. She was also the first vessel to feature 3 outdoor swimming pools for each class of cabin, and also one of the few to have air conditioning throughout. Overall, Andrea Doria was 29,000 tons, 700 feet long, with a 90-foot beam. She could carry a maximum of 1,241 passengers and 563 crew. Safety was another large aspect which was given some thought to. Like most ocean liners of the time, Italian Lines had planned for the vessel to do regular transatlantic crossings from Europe to North America. So, she was fitted with 11 watertight compartments. It was believed that if any 2 of these compartments were breached, the vessel could stay afloat. And if there was the case of abandoning ship, there would also be enough lifeboats for every soul on board, made up of 8 on each side of the vessel. Even in technology, the bridge was more informed, with early radar detection fitted in. All in all, Andrea Doria was thought to be one of the most capable, luxurious, and safest vessels afloat. A floating liner embodiment of the opulence and style Italy was known for. However, despite all of the praises and capabilities she was thought to have had, this monument of engineering would soon face its ultimate test.
Guys, Exam Labs can help you easily pass your certification exam on your first try, and you can change your career in the course of 1 month. First thing you want to do is get a membership with Exam Labs, unlimited access. I'd recommend a yearly membership because you get a whopping 50% discount on almost 2,000 latest certified questions and answers. All that for less than $3 a day. That's cheaper than your Starbucks Frappuccino. So give up your morning coffee addiction and invest.
Over the next 3 years or so, the vessel had completed 50 Atlantic crossings, successfully carrying thousands of passengers to and from the continents. The 51st crossing was also going to be rather mundane, sailing from Genoa, Italy to New York City in the United States. Andrea Doria set sail on July 17, 1956, with around 90% occupancy. At the helm was Captain Piero Calem, a decorated sailor and well-respected among his crew. This was to be his last voyage as master of the Andrea Doria, since he was soon to be promoted to her sister ship. After 3 European ports of call, the luxury ocean liner began her journey across the Atlantic with 1,706 people on board. Across the ocean, a passenger ship named the MS Stockholm began its journey from New York City to Gothenburg, Sweden. She was owned by the Swedish American Line and was actually one of the smallest ocean crossing vessels at the time, at just 12,165 tons, less than half the size of the Doria. However, while the Stockholm's reputation was more on comfort over style, the vessel was unique in that it was designed with a reinforced ice-breaking bow for northern passings. She was known to be one of the most reliable passenger vessels at sea. Aboard are over 700 passengers and crew, all heading eastbound. It's July 25th, and the Stockholm is sailing out into open waters. Around 200 nautical miles away is the Andrea Doria, traveling in the opposite direction, about to conclude her 9-day Atlantic voyage. Since around 2:40 p.m., the Doria had been encountering heavy fog. The captain ordered a reduction of speed and began sounding the foghorn with all of her watertight doors closed, which is often standard procedure in this type of weather. Meanwhile, as the sun set, the Stockholm was traveling south of the Nantucket Lightship, which at the time was a beacon to warn vessels of the uncharted Nantucket Shoals. However, in violation of the North Atlantic Track Agreement, the Stockholm was traveling around 20 miles north of the recommended eastbound passage. She was moving at around 18 knots, and this decision to travel further off course was deliberate in order to save time. But this also meant that the Stockholm was traveling the wrong way in a busy westbound passage, the very same one that the Andrea Doria is currently steaming down. While the Stockholm hadn't reached the fog bank yet, both vessels had known about each other's presence via radar. On the bridge of the Doria, apparently they knew another vessel was traveling in the opposite direction, but had believed that it was on a different course. Neither ship had attempted radio contact. At around 11 p.m., both ships were approaching each other at almost 20 knots each. As the radar blips grew closer and the fog thickened even more, the Andrea Doria gradually steered to their left in an effort to try and widen the distance for a starboard-to-starboard passing. By now, the officers on the bridge could get a visual of the ship off into the distance, with a high rate of speed and an unchanged course. The Stockholm, however, still couldn't see the Doria, and only relied on the radar, which appeared to be showing the two ships around 12 miles apart. In reality, though, it's believed that the Stockholm's radar was set to a different range scale, so in reality, they were more like 4 miles apart. With the gap closing, the Stockholm turned 20 degrees to the right, which they believed was going to widen their distance. With the massive ships now visible through the dense fog and the reality of where their mistakes had put them, the Stockholm tried to make a last-minute maneuver hard to starboard with their engines at full reverse. The Andrea Doria kept her 22 knots and turned hard to port, however there was no stopping what was about to happen. At 11:10 p.m., the Stockholm collided bow first into the Andrea Doria's starboard side. The collision caused catastrophic damage to both ships, crushing in the Stockholm's entire prow, but even worse, tearing a massive hole into the Doria's hull. Almost immediately, the Andrea Doria began listing around 18 degrees. The collision had torn open 5 fuel tanks on the Doria's starboard side, which quickly filled with water. This, coupled with the fact that there was no fuel in the port side tanks, since she was at the end of her journey, meant that the list was even more severe. But still, only one watertight compartment had been breached, and of course she was designed to stay afloat even if 2 had been compromised. However, this would only remain true if the vessel listed no more than 15 degrees. Andrea Doria was already at 20 due to the empty fuel tanks, which meant over time, water would seep over top the watertight bulkheads and eventually take the ship down. The generator room, which could have been vital to using the pumps for stabilization, had also been flooded from the crash, rendering it not an option. Ultimately, the damage was considered too much, and the captain ordered an abandoned ship as radio distress calls were sent out. The Andrea Doria was sinking. It's now been just 30 minutes after the collision, and immediately passengers were making their way to the lifeboat deck. All boats on the starboard side, filled with scared passengers, had been lowered into the dark seas below. However, on the other side of the ship, there was an issue. Because the vessel had been listing to such a violent degree, launching lifeboats on the port side became impossible, which now meant there were hundreds of passengers still on board with no place to go. However, luckily that wasn't the case, as the Stockholm was close by. Their crew assessed the damage and deemed the vessel was in no immediate danger of sinking. So, the Stockholm began taking on survivors and used their own lifeboats to ferry passengers from the Doria back to their ship. Meanwhile, distress calls had gotten the attention of a cargo ship, the United States Navy, and a large passenger vessel called the Ile-de-France, all of which were making their way to the site as quickly as they could. Over the course of the next few hours, the Stockholm, as well as other nearby freighters, continued to assist with the rescue. It wasn't until the Ile-de-France came into range, however, that hope was restored. Thanks to the massive size of the France, their efforts using the lifeboats to rescue the passengers off the sinking Andrea Doria sped up the process. Through the night, various ships of all different classes helped transfer survivors off the sinking liner, a remarkable effort which proved successful as 1,633 people had been evacuated. Finally, with the captain and his senior officers on the last boat from the Doria, daybreak revealed how catastrophic the situation had become. With seemingly everyone off the ship, the Andrea Doria continued to list further and further to starboard. As she did, more and more seawater found its way over the watertight bulkheads, through windows, down hallways and staircases, as other compartments filled with water. In turn, that only made the list worse. That cycle continued as the weight of the flooding pulled her further and further down. Suddenly, the ship became swallowed by the ocean, slowly capsizing as water rushed over the bow. This caused the ship to roll completely on her starboard side as the sinking accelerated. Incredibly, especially for the time, this was all captured on camera just as the ship started to go down. Finally, at 10:09 a.m. on July 26, 1956, the Andrea Doria had slipped beneath the surface right in front of the passengers who had just gotten off her. It had been 11 hours since the collision, and the Andrea Doria was now gone. 51 people in total had lost their lives, 46 aboard the Doria, and 5 from the Stockholm. The disaster made headlines all over the world. The pride and flagship of the Italian fleet, perishing in the first major peacetime accident since the Titanic, all happening on the eastern American coast. Almost immediately, the two shipping lines began fighting in court over who was to blame. After several months of hearings and lawsuits from the victims' families, a joint out-of-court settlement was established from both corporations, contributing with payments to those affected. While no official conclusion was ever published, the Andrea Doria, as well as her crew, was actually the ones put mostly to blame. Pivotal decisions like not following proper radar procedures and failing to adhere to the long-standard rule which states that when a vessel is approaching head-on, you are to turn right to allow passing. The Doria had turned to port, as the Stockholm correctly turned to starboard. The crew was also not following company protocol with filling the empty fuel tanks with seawater as ballast, which ultimately led to the severe list. But that leads to one of the most prominent factors of the disaster being Andrea Doria's actual design. Ever since her maiden voyage, the vessel was known to be quite unstable, notably encountering a storm on that maiden voyage and listing all the way to around 28 degrees. That's with a design that would only allow lifeboats to be lowered no greater than 15 degrees. So that beautiful styling came with some serious concerns. But speaking of that design, what happened to her sister ship? Well, that vessel carried on Atlantic service until around 1973. Afterwards, she was sold for various other tasks while being unmaintained. The ship was eventually sold in 1982 for scrap metal. However, that wasn't the only sister the Doria had, as it turns out. After the 1956 disaster, Italian lines had commissioned a replacement vessel for their fleet. So they used the same design, ever so slightly scaled it up, and launched it in 1960, called the SS Leonardo da Vinci. That vessel was actually 4,000 tons larger than the Andrea Doria, and displayed, even more, how poorly designed it was. The Da Vinci was also very prone to rolling in bad weather, so as a result, the company fitted 3,000 metric tons of iron to the hull in an effort to help stabilize the ship. This was obviously a desperate attempt to help fix the broken design, and this added weight only made the ship even more fuel hungry. After just 5 years, the vessel was changed to offer pleasure cruises around warmer climates. However, by 1976, the ship was passed to a subsidiary of Italian Lines. In 1978, she was removed from service and laid up until a 4-day-long fire broke out aboard the abandoned ocean liner. She eventually capsized in the harbor and was later refloated, then broken up for scrap metal, ending the Doria class of ships. But what about the vessel that ultimately sunk the Doria, the Swedish-flagged Stockholm? Well, you are not going to believe this, but the Stockholm, an ocean liner built in 1948, has been operating up until 2020. That is an insanely long service for a ship, especially one from this era, it being one of the only still-in-service ocean liners to this day. Of course, over a 72-year-long period, some changes have been made and new owners have come through. Around 11, in fact, with 10 different name changes. In 1993, she was completely refitted to become a full-time cruise ship, with a massive gutting and new additions to the superstructure. Today, she's called the Astoria, and looking at the ship now, it is pretty hard to tell that it ever once looked like this. However, it is insanely cool that you can take a cruise aboard the ship that sunk the Andrea Doria. But now, the only place to see the iconic sunken ocean liner is 250 feet under the ocean, 52 miles off the coast of Nantucket Island, and 230 miles from its intended destination of New York City. The wreck site, however, has been quite dangerous for divers looking to explore, taking the lives of at least 13 since 1998. Due to the strong currents and the aluminum makeup of the vessel's superstructure, massive parts of the Andrea Doria have fallen off. The wreck has been deteriorating rather quickly, and at this point, it's almost unrecognizable as to the luxury liner it once was. Andrea Doria was only 3 years old when she sank, a tragic loss for the struggling country she was the pride of. A beautiful and luxurious Italian ocean liner, iconic for the era of class and elegance. However, due to fatal flaws she was designed with, and human error from both ships, the Doria met a quick and famous end. While the scale and prominence of the vessel can be compared to other major maritime disasters like the Titanic, I think the Andrea Doria will always go down in history as a luxury ocean liner met with unfortunate circumstances, yet thanks to the calm and professional crew, helped save almost everyone on board. It was a showcase on proving no matter how much technology advances and how safe designers think they have made something, accidents always happen, and when it comes down to it, the survival of those on board give thanks to the heroic men and women who stood up to the challenge and saved lives. I think the early morning of July 26, 1956 proved that, and made the Andrea Doria known as one of the most successful and elaborate maritime rescues in history. I remember a few years ago, I visited the old Premier Cruise Line's headquarters in Port Canaveral. In there was a massive model of the Oceanic. After seeing the plaque reading maritime replicas, I immediately did some searching until just a few months ago when I decided to take the dive and buy my very own model ship, custom made from maritime replicas. I spoke with Warren Samet, who's owned the company for the past 33 years and has been curating a portfolio of superb quality and excellent work. He's worked with almost every major cruise line and is trusted by massive companies globally. He was incredibly kind to me, and it got me thinking that his company would be a great sponsor for this video, since they have several models in overstock, finished and ready to be sent to a new home. They have an assortment of cruise ships and ocean liners, but perhaps most notably out of them is the Andrea Doria, which is highly detailed and proportionate to the actual real vessel, which, if you do some research on ship models, is not often the case. Now obviously these types of collectibles are not for everyone, but if you email Maritime Replicas today and mention Bright Sun Films brought you there, then you can get 5% off your purchase, which I believe is a pretty great deal. So if you're like me and have a special appreciation for this type of detailed artwork and craftsmanship, then I truly couldn't implore you more to reach out yourself and inquire about getting your own model today. Email them through replicas@aol.com and make sure that you say you came from Bright Sun Films to get 5% off. Thanks to Maritime Replicas for sponsoring this video, and if you're one of the lucky people who snatched up one of their overstock models, shoot me a picture of it on Twitter, as I'd love to see where you display it. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm a pretty big fan of models. Thanks for watching, everyone.